Good morning, Excellencies, esteemed speakers, UN and CSO colleagues. Thank you for joining us today. We have an exciting discussion, as I mentioned earlier. Before we begin, I would like to provide an overview of the flow of the program today. We will begin with welcoming and opening remarks by our co-host of today's session, Mr. Michael Messenger, President and CEO of World Vision Canada on behalf of World Vision International, and Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Robert Ray, Permanent Representative of Canada to the UN on behalf of Canada. And this will be followed by remarks by His Excellency Ambassador Brian Wallace, Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the UN and co-chair of the Group of Friends on Children and the SDGs, and then followed by presentation by panel speakers for about 45 minutes. We'll go into Q&A for about 15 minutes, and then closing. So in the interest of time, I'm now going to introduce each speaker, provide a long bio and so forth, incredible bios. I understand it's been shared with all of you already, so I would like to welcome Mr. Michael Messenger, President and CEO of World Vision Canada, for his welcome and to provide us an overview of the report. Over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this. Distinguished ambassadors, partners, friends, delegates. On behalf of all of us at World Vision, we are delighted to welcome you here today and to launch this report, Putting Children First, as we are on the margins of the Financing for Development Forum. And we hope to send a clear message to all our stakeholders present that investing in children is the smartest investment that we as a development community can make. I want to thank particularly Ambassador Ray and the Canadian Permanent Mission for co-hosting the event with us. Investing in children, of course, is also the right thing to do. It ensures that children can survive and thrive in all contexts, and that helps us to secure our collective survival and prosperity as individual nations and global society. It's right because we've made a nearly universal commitment to the Convention on the Rights of Children to support and ensure their rights. It's right because investing in children benefits the whole society now and not just through future returns. Whether we are parents or not, all of us see the potential in children, how they can help change the world for the better today and become the leaders that we need for tomorrow. Today we're presenting a summary of some joint research that World Vision undertook with Ernst & Young Australia that shows conclusively that the return on this investment for the child, for community, and country is huge. We're focused specifically at the moment on how overseas development assistance donors can invest in children, but of course this is something that we're also saying to governments, to UN agencies, and to our civil society partners. All of us together need to increase our focus on children. Before I say a few words about the return on investment that we see, maybe we can just briefly talk about the situation for children globally. Because notwithstanding the important gains made in some contexts and in some of the SDGs, the overall story is not good. In fact, this is a time of crisis, one of the hardest times to be a child in recent years. The so-called polycrisis of COVID-19's lingering effects, climate change, conflict, the cost of living, it impacts all children, but also particularly the most vulnerable, and often the greatest impact is on children. We know the generational cost in human and development capital is incalculable, leading to cycles of deprivation for families and communities. Just a few of the devastating indications for this crisis that many of us know. More than 1 billion children today experience multidimensional poverty with limited access to health services, education, and fulfillment of basic needs, including shelter, food, and water. More than 450 children worldwide, that's 1 in 6, are living in a conflict zone. We're seeing the terrible statistics of the impact on children in such places as Sudan, Myanmar, and Gaza, where troubling terms like a war on children have been coined. 1 billion children, that's over half of all children aged 2 to 17, have experienced some form of physical, sexual, or emotional violence in the last 12 months alone. And 160 million children worldwide, representing an increase of 8.5 million over the last 4 years, are victims or involved with child labor. I had the opportunity to travel to Tigray in northern Ethiopia last September. It's actually hard to imagine a place that is perhaps more challenging to be a child. One of the gifts of trips like this is to interact with children themselves, to hear their stories, that we treat very carefully. I remember meeting 8-year-old Hadush Daniel at an Guna IDP camp in Shire in northwest Tigray. Hadush had seen more violence than most of us will ever see, or should I say never see, in our lifetime, in just his 8 years. In their home village, we learned that his mother, Lada Birhani, had owned a small restaurant. Her husband was also a small business owner, and they had a small house and a plot of land that they called their own. But when the violence started, Lada Birhani and her children were separated from her children. They escaped the conflict with the clothes on their back. The mother and her daughters, along with Hadush, who was 6 years old at the time, suffered unspeakable abuse. I learned one of his other older brothers had been killed. He remembered every detail of the abuse that happened to himself and his family. And at 8 years old, he was still fearful and traumatized by what he had seen. He was with his family, all living now in this camp on a small room, sleeping together on the floor. Now, I was encouraged in that context to see how improving his life was helping him heal at least a little. And actually, despite his pain, when I saw him smile when he had the opportunity to return to a school that had recently been established after being closed for a number of years, there was a spark of hope. And sharing stories like these, we do to share the glimpse of hope amidst the pain, and of course meeting other students and children like Hadush. That helps us bring home the reality of seeing the opportunities for children and recommitting ourselves as an organization and sharing this with others to doing what we can to help them live up to their God-given potential. Yet, as I mentioned, despite 35 years of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and despite the affirmation of the centrality of children in the 2030 Agenda, well-being of children has taken a step backwards, and it threatens the whole 2030 Agenda success. Indeed, the only way, from our perspective, to meet the SDGs is to put children at the heart of our efforts to achieve these goals. So that's the context of children in today's world. What do we know about how donors have responded? Well, the first thing we learned is that we don't really track investments in children at the OECD DAC level, for example. That itself is likely the first indication of the challenge. But from our research with Ernst & Young, we've determined that from 2017 to 2021, only 5% of all overseas development assistance, official ODA, was directly focused on children, and only another 7% indirectly. So even if we use that aggregate figure, it means that only 12% of ODA was directed at the girls and boys who make up 46% of the population of countries that receive assistance. Secondly, what do we know about the impact of ODA that's invested in children? While child-related interventions are known to deliver benefits to generations beyond, the ability to quantify the benefits across a range of child-focused investments attributable to ODA has been limited. Well, until now, because that's the next step of this report. Our joint economic analysis has sought to quantify the social and economic benefits of these investments to support good decision-making of ODA investments. And using a robust analysis of the economic impacts of these investments, our research has identified a total ROI of $10 for every $1 invested in children. Investing $1 is expected to return 10 in benefits through health, education, and other relevant direct benefits and additional societal value to children and the broader community. This return includes direct benefits of $7 and additional indirect quantifiable benefits of nearly $3, delivered through programming that supports and empowers children, their families, and wider communities. So, given that, prioritizing ODA investment for children simply makes sense. And investing in children creates a ripple effect, lasting improvements in the development and welfare of generations of children, their communities, and nations. It offers value for money, and it's the best way to achieve donor objectives and the SDGs. For governments, UN agencies, and civil society, all of us, together we need to increase our focus on children. Investing in children benefits the child today, enables the best future for them, and in our view, and based on this research, gives the greatest chance of successful development for the entire community. And so we commend this research to you as we together consider how to use ODA and other programs to most effectively improve the lives of children, families, and their nations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for an overview of the report of Putting Children First and for sharing with us Nadusha's story, but still sharing that there is a ray of hope to bring about meaningful change in the lives of children. But we really have to be mindful of where ODA is going, how it's tracked, how it's invested. So in this time of crisis impacting all children with the war on children, there is an urgency to put children first and at the heart of SDGs, and ensuring that we do the necessary advocacy efforts to have ODA channel, the right channels to impact the lives of children. So thank you so much for that report and for the overview. And with that, I would like to welcome Ambassador Bob Ray, Permanent Representative of Canada to the United Nations, to provide welcome and opening remarks. Thank you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the chance to join in this celebration, really, of a remarkable report and a remarkable breakthrough. I think it's going to have a lasting impact on all of us, and particularly at a time when resources are hard to come by, which is unfortunately the world we're living in at the moment. It's important to give policymakers and governments the chance to really understand what the evidence tells us, and I think it really is an experience that we have in government domestically. Governments have been learning for a long time that the investments that we make in children, in early childhood education and in education, and also identifying what happens to the most vulnerable kids if we don't find them soon and quick and deal with them. We know this from our own domestic policy making that this requires a special focus, and why I think it is that governments are, almost regardless of political stripe, beginning to get it and understand that this is the wisest form of investment. I know in my own career as premier, I had a really strong relationship with a child psychiatrist from Hamilton named Daniel Offord. His center now is named after him. He's passed away. But Dan came in to see me when I was elected and said, Premier, I want to convince you that the most important thing you can do is pay attention to kids. He became a dear friend. And in all of the advocacy that he made to me, he said, look, we can keep kids out of trouble. We can keep kids out of jail. We can keep them in school. We can do all these things, but only if we focus and really make sure that's where our resources are going. And the temptation to spend elsewhere will always be there, but this is one place where you can make a huge difference. And those lessons have stayed with me ever since. And I do think that it only makes sense to me to say, well, if that's true for what we try to do at home, it's got to be true for what we try to do in all of our foreign assistance programs. So you have a convert in me, and I hope I can help to encourage others to come in a similar direction. We're coming up to an important time in the life of the cycle of the UN. We're in financing for development, which we're doing and talking now. We throw around numbers, but to me, when you throw around numbers, it has no impact on people. So when I was appointed to be the special envoy on the Rohingya situation, I immediately went to the camp in Cox's Bazar and spent most of my time with the kids. And it is a tragic situation, and it still is. Many years later, nothing has improved. In fact, in many respects, the conditions have deteriorated. But I will always have in my mind's eye the faces of the kids, and a feeling that I had then and I have now of the universal resilience of children, how they are able to respond so quickly to affection and to recognition and to engagement. And this is something we see all the time, but it's very, very true in this experience. Here at the UN, we're about to go through some important moments. The Summit of the Future coming up, the IDA renewal, that's going to be something that we're looking at with respect to the World Bank. And we are consciously trying to bring all of these projects in World Bank, IMF, what the UN is doing, what UN agencies are doing, bring them together as we go through our schedule. I compare this job to being in high school. It's like the schedule is everything. You have to be there at a certain time, and I will have to leave here, at a certain time, and that's the way it goes. But we do have a schedule on development that is exceptionally important, and we do have a timetable for ourselves on the SDGs. And I think the SDGs need a renewal, but they also need a refocus. I think we have to figure out how to make this word SDG, which isn't even a word, bunch of initials, make it real. And I think what you're giving us in this report is something that will help to make it real. What are we doing for the kids? What are we doing for this generation of children, and what are we doing for future generations of kids? And I think that's something that we can all understand and respond to in a positive way. So I look forward to being part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to my term as president of ECOSOC, and I hope we can make this a bit of a focus as we go forward. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you,
for
Ambassador.
the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador Ray, and we really look forward to your presidency as well. It's going to be excellent for civil society organizations to have you lead the helm of that institution. So thank you for also Canada's leadership for children, the impact that you make around the world. We, as civil society, we watch very closely, and even coming from the financing for development perspectives, the conversations that we have really have appreciate the open way in which Canada approaches the discussions, and we have that opportunity to engage with you. So thank you, Ambassador, for your leadership in the space, and also the insightful words that you shared. And you talked about the IMF World Bank meetings that just happened recently. They talked a lot about efficiency and streamlining, and really, but its coordination is much more important than anything else, right? We cannot operate in silos. So really appreciate this. So with that, I would like to share a few introductory remarks. So Excellencies, esteemed speakers, NGOs and CSO colleagues, a warm welcome to all of you to the moderated segment of today's session. My deep appreciation to Arelis Bellerini from World Vision for inviting me to moderate this discussion. So to set the context for today's discussion, I'd like to share a few remarks from an FFD perspective. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the outcome from the most recent conference on financing for development held in Addis Ababa in 2015, mentions children 12 times. Specifically, Para 7 speaks to scaling up investments in international cooperation to allow all children to complete free, equitable, inclusive, and quality early childhood, primary, and secondary education, including through scaling up and strengthening initiatives such as the Global Partnership for Education. At the last week's IMF World Bank meetings, IMF economist Michel Fornino, in the analysis of a report titled Building Tomorrow's Workforce, Education, and Africa's Demographic Dividend, pointed out that employment tomorrow requires that children get a quality education today, and that it is in everyone's interest that the region spends more on education and that donors maintain financial support. Yet, it is a point of concern when the final draft of the outcome document for the FFD Forum mentions children just once in paragraph 13, which begins with, we recognize the urgent need to support people in vulnerable situations, followed by the usual list of those considered to be in such situations: women, people with disabilities, children, and so forth. If we are serious about making the impact necessary to build tomorrow's workforce, we need to move away from this language of supporting to one of investing. My congratulations to Ernst & Young and World Vision International for this game-changing report, and to the co-hosts for convening this important and timely discussion. The report points out that the returns of investment, the world stands to gain from investing in children are tremendous. Yet only 12% of the official development assistance is targeted towards this. Interestingly, a similar percentage was shared by the 2024 Interagency Task Force report on financing for development. which pointed out that the poorest countries now spend 12% of their revenues on interest payments for servicing their sovereign debt, 4 times more than they spent a decade ago, and that roughly 40% of the global population live in countries where governments spend more on interest payments than on education or health. How is this translating to investments in children and their future, especially when we continue to be confronted with a cost of living crisis, environmental and geopolitical crisis? As we prepare for the 2025 FFD conference, where so much hope is placed to set the course right for development finance as a whole, the efforts in the lead up and preparations need to be much more on investments in international actions to make intentional actions to make a meaningful impact for the long term for people everywhere, and especially in the lives of children, and guarantee them a brighter future over what we have been able to achieve so far. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. So let's see how we can all collaborate, coming from the FFD perspective, to make the impact where it's needed. So with that, I would like to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Brian Wallace, Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the UN and co-chair of the Group of Friends of Children at SDGs. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to be here with you. My first and primary role is that of a father. I happen to also co-chair the Group of Friends on Children and the SDGs. I also co-chair the Group of Friends of SDG Financing with this guy. I also co-facilitate the process on the Declaration on Future Generations. So from where I sit, I get to see all of what needs to be done. And it's actually not that hard. I have a nice, pretty speech here that I can, and I will read it through because I'm here in my capacity as co-chair of the Group of Friends. But I just wanted to say, what is really missing is that political will. There is no shortage of resources. The earth is abundant in resources. And sometimes, especially in times like now, it's hard not to despair because you see this. Sometimes I think we've lost our minds when we think that a war that destroys the lives of children in huge numbers is an appropriate way to solve political problems. I think we've lost our hearts when we see the suffering of children in war zones and caused by climate, and we do very little about it. We've lost our hearts when we can see that suffering and not divert resources to where it's needed. And so sometimes I think we've just lost our humanity. Because if you can look at children suffering and not help, not change the way you allocate resources and direct it to saving them, then how are we going to do it for each other? So we have a lot to do to change mindsets. And we're hoping that the process leading to the Pact for the Future and the Declaration on Future Generations is going to trigger a change in our mindset, our approach to decision making, indeed our approach to allocation of resources that not only addresses the problems of today, but lays a solid foundation for the youth, for children, and indeed for future generations. And now I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the co-chairs of the Group of Friends of Children and the SDGs. It is opportune that we are convened here today under the theme, Putting Children First for Sustainable Development, the return on investment from official development assistance targeting children. Interestingly, the Group of Friends was formed 9 years ago as a cross-regional coalition of member states to champion child rights during the negotiations for the 2030 Agenda and the third International Conference on Financing for Development. Since then, our commitment towards ensuring that the rights of children and their well-being remain at the heart of various intergovernmental discussions has grown from strength to strength. True to this commitment, most recently the group of friends submitted written inputs for consideration in the formation of the zero draft text of the ongoing ECOSOC Forum on Financing for Development, follow-up in 2024, which we hope to deliver sometime this week, if the schedule allows. But ladies and gentlemen, a weakening global economy, growing polarization among states, and the onset of new and emerging global challenges have created a confluence of crises that place children the most at risk of being left behind. With the most recent shocks, which have widened systemic barriers to achieving the SDGs, and cognizant that progress on the SDGs are well off track, with only 6 years before the end of the 2030 Agenda, it is clear that time is running out. The window to rescuing the SDGs is closing. By extent, this diminishes our opportunity to create a world that fulfills the best interest of our children. Notwithstanding, progress can still be accelerated by prioritizing the fulfillment of the rights of each and every child when designing and implementing national action plans geared towards achievement of the 2030 Agenda. In doing so, we managed to make small and concrete steps in safeguarding a future worthy of them to inherit. Investing in children is not only a moral imperative, but also a proven strategy that accelerates the achievement of the SDGs. With this goal in mind, discussions surrounding financing for development becomes even more imperative. The achievement of the SDGs, financing for development, and the realization of children's rights are not mutually exclusive of each other. Discussions surrounding FFD are nuanced and complex and require a comprehensive approach to balance the short-term and long-term sustainable development goals. In conjunction to this, the growing finance divide continues to curtail the ability of governments to invest in the areas of their country that need it the most, including in those areas that most benefit children, such as health and education. Though it may be difficult to assess in exact terms, since children benefit from a multiplicity of programs, policies, and structures, evidence has shown that approximately each dollar invested in children can have a return of up to $10 in terms of direct improvements in their well-being. Further, the expansion of public social spending across sectors such as education, health, nutrition, and social protection, in large part, primarily benefits the most vulnerable in our societies, which of course includes children. Consistent investments in these areas can broker long-term benefits for our children: greater access to healthcare, lower rates of poverty, increased academic achievement and school attendance, more nutritious diets, safer environments, and more. The return on investments in children is even higher the earlier it is made, given that they receive better supported childhoods. Now, without bold and ambitious actions and solutions to facilitate easier access to affordable long-term financing for development, we cannot create the fiscal space needed to make this a reality in all countries for our children. We must, as a matter of urgency, explore innovative financing mechanisms, financial inclusion, and improved access to concessional financing and development assistance to close the widening financial gap. The most vulnerable children are most often found in countries where improving their welfare depends on ODA. We must commit to increased and better targeted ODA investments, enhancing the amount of ODA designated for country program aid, as well as commit to enhancing domestic resource mobilization. Delivery on these commitments will contribute to the return on investment for ODA, especially targeted for children. Now, there remains a lot to be done, but it can be done. Our decisions will act as investments in the lives of our children. The return on investment will be healthy, more educated, productive, and fulfilled children. Imagine the world they could inherit and the future they will lead if we make the necessary investments today at the international, national, and local levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wallace. Thank you for your Thank you, Ambassador Wallace. Thank you for your leadership and also for the multiple hats that you're wearing, which all gives you the opportunity to make this impact that is necessary. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And also for really pointing out that there is really a political will that's missing. There are abundant resources, and triggering a change in the mindset is what is needed. And we constantly hear that all through the discussion. Triggering mindset change is needed, but what is that we can do to trigger that mindset change, right? And so put our heads together, really talk about it in a meaningful way so that we can make that impactful change. You also talked about the areas of financing for development and your role in the areas of financing for development coming from the group of friends on children and SDGs. It's very important that, instead of operating I was actually having an earlier conversation about UNICEF. We hear about agencies we've talked about, but they are all talked about in silos. It's important to bring these conversations into the FFD discussions, right? And as we lead up to the FFD conference, we should really figure out a way to have all these various voices come together so that it's much more meaningful, regardless of where they come from, what institutions, what issues they're focusing on, whether it's children, whether it's women. It's important that all these voices are heard during the FFD conference. So thank you for your leadership and for your remarks. So with that, I would like to bring your attention to a video that we are going to be showing shortly. It's a brief video with children's voices. Children are agents of change. It is a principle in the Child Rights Convention and acknowledged in the 2030 Agenda. We need to listen to their voices in everything we do. They always have views on the issues that affect their lives. So with that, I'd like to invite Mackenzie to put on the video. Thank you.
It's very important for donors to invest in children because there are many reasons. Nowadays, children around the world, they are suffering, and there are a whole lot of loopholes when it comes to child development process. And for an example, in the community where I find myself, it's a place where it is very, very difficult for children's rights to be protected, for children's rights to be respected, or for the well-being of the child, for it to be promoted.
Las recomendaciones que le haría a los gobiernos y a estos donantes es que sí, realmente hay un vacío, porque un 12%, un 46% hay un bastante vacío amplio, pero recordemos que cuando nosotros involucramos a los niños en nuestras charlas, a los niños en esos foros donde colocamos el presupuesto, donde llevamos más que todo esas acciones que se van a hacer y esas metas que cumplir, vamos también a tener la opinión del niño que vive y que es consciente de lo que está pasando y lo que le está sucediendo a él en su mundo.
The problems that we the young children are facing most is sometimes that since we're in Karamoja, we're in a dry area, and most of the time, and almost all our parents are farmers. So we, as the children in Karamoja, we are not studying because now there is no money even for going to school.
If you are investing in a child, it means you are just saving money for future generation. Children are future generation, and if you really try to invest in them, like if you take them to school, make them to study, it means that you are really saving money for the future.
If a child doesn't go to school, who can that child become in future? For every development, for every fast-growing development of any country, it has to do with the upcoming generational leaders.
Me personally, I didn't know that I would go to school. It is the work of the NGO which has made me to be in school up to now. I would have not been in school. They are the ones supporting me to school. And in addition, also my young brothers and sisters, they are also studying in school due to the support of other NGOs. Donors should highly emphasize on education. Reason being, when you study, there are many jobs you can get, and this is even you are speaking, you have studied. So the children must study so that they can be somewhere somehow.
From here, since our parents, they consider as a girl child, educating a girl child is a waste of time. They now prefer taking a boy child to school than a girl child. because they consider it as a waste of time. And since there is poverty, they at least say that at least a girl child should go and get married, and so that she can get like cows to support the family, so that the boy child can go to school.
Yo creo que es importante que los gobiernos y los donantes inviertan en la infancia, porque la infancia, además de ser niños, niñas y adolescentes, ser el presente y el futuro, ayudan al crecimiento de nuestro planeta, ¿sí?
I do think it is very, very relevant for donors or potential donors for them to help in bridging all of these gaps for child's development.
Thank you for that video. Nothing much needed to be said, other than that, we really, as Ambassador was pointing, there needs to be a change in mindset. The children talked about financial aspects, and Ambassador had mentioned about financial inclusion, which is something that we are challenged within the NGO Committee on F50, because that's one of our priority areas. We talk about financial inclusion, but we don't provide the education, the financial literacy, the digital literacy, which should be done in school. Children should not have to worry about these areas as they become adults and not being able to manage their finances. They also need a safe school environment. Right, I come from India, and there are schools in India, in the villages of India, where children sit in classrooms where the snakes come into the classroom. Children, there's no safe environment for them, right? And resources are not reaching where it is needed. So it's just not purely about designing, but it's also about implementation and really tracking how is it getting to the ground. So with that, I would like to welcome our next set of speakers who are joining us remotely, Liva Abdick and Matthew Lum from EY Australia. So they will provide a brief presentation of the collaboration and methodology of the research with World Vision. They developed a dashboard that presents the figures in the report in a more visible way. The dashboard can be found in the World Vision website. So over to you, Liva and Matthew.
Greetings from Australia to all those in the room and those online. My name is Matthew and I'm joined here today by my colleague Eva, who I work with at EY Australia. Though we regret not being able to join you in person, we are grateful for the opportunity to be part of this significant event and reflect on the invaluable experiences we've shared collaborating with the World Vision International team. As a proud participant in the United Nations Global Compact, at EY we are committed towards advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. Through a dedicated program, EY Ripples, EY people are devoting their time to SDG focused projects, bringing together the combined skills, knowledge and experience of the global EY network in pursuit of one shared vision, to positively impact 1 billion lives by 2030. When World Vision International approached us, we understood both the importance and complexity of this work to support ODA donors in better understanding the current levels and value of their commitments. Similarly to the EY Ripples program, the focus on children as our next generation was of particular importance to us. We know that over 1 billion children across the globe are living in poverty, without their basic needs such as shelter, food and water being met, without adequate access to health services and education. The research suggests that such conditions may lead to lifelong consequences and an ongoing cycle of poverty.
To support all ODA donors around the world, we have worked closely together with the World Vision International team to develop a tool advancing the progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals that are related to children. And we believe we have developed a unique and robust solution to support ODA donors in making their decisions. We have undertaken an economic appraisal that analyzed ODA between 2017 and 2021, and we attributed and evaluated benefits from ODA targeting children and broader communities. We looked at a very broad spectrum of benefits that are related to health, well-being, increased education, as well as empowerment of children and communities. One particular feature of our analysis was the development of a unique algorithm tool that enables us to better understand how much ODA is actually child-related. Relying on a number of different characteristics describing the 8 as well as the ODA recipient, we have found two types of child-related investments. And these are child-specific ODA that captures investments targeting child-specific needs and services, or child-benefiting ODA, capturing investments that are partially related to children and more focused on general improvements in infrastructure, in health, education, social services that affect children as well as other members of communities. After we identified the levels of child-related ODA, we attributed and monetized benefits of projects and programs funded by ODA. Our findings suggest that a total social value of $10 is generated for every dollar invested in children through ODA. These benefits comprise of health and well-being, increased opportunities from schooling, and other benefits delivered through increased knowledge and awareness in the broader community. Despite the high returns, only 12% of ODA were found to be child-related, of which 5% specifically targeting the welfare of children through improved access to child-specific needs and services.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and we hope that you find our analysis presented in a dashboard you will see soon valuable.
Thank you.
2 slides of the dashboard. Sorry, I'll just so people can hear me. We wanted to give you a little bit of an advanced preview of what the dashboard looks like. It is an interactive dashboard, so you will be able to go into different areas, but this has the global overview where you can look at how much, what the total ODA was that was child-specific, child-benefiting, child-related overall. And then you can go in and look by year as well. What the dashboard also has the ability to do, as you can see, is the share by donor country, and then also looking at the different categories of funding. So how much is going into health or education or peace and safety or gender equality. So that's the global picture. And then you can also go into a donor snapshot or a recipient snapshot. So I've done, can we have the next slide? I've done just the donor investment snapshot, which looks obviously looks similar, but you can select which donor country or donor entity, and again look at what the ranking is, what the different spend is, and most important, well, quite importantly, is looking at whether that's going up or down and how it relates to the global population of children. And so again, you have you can look at how much ODA is going, where it's specifically going to from that donor, as well as by SDG, what percentage is being used for that. So there's a lot of possibilities. This will be live on our website today.
Yes.
Today. Yes. So do have a look, and it gives you a great opportunity to understand a bit more what we've been talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you for the dashboard and also the presentation. And also it sort of speaks to what we've been hearing all the way through. Child-specific investments and focus on children is crucial when there are 1 billion children living in poverty. So, and this is incredible. This resource is incredible. So questions later as to see how we can best use it in the various areas that we are all working in. And what is the best way to bring it to the IMF, the World Bank, wherever we are working. So it'll be important to look at that. So with that, I would like to from a transition from a virtual session to in-person speakers. So my first speaker here is Dr. Najat Malamajid, Special Representative of the Secretary General on Ending Violence Against Children. And we have a question for you. So in your advocacy, you emphasize the need to see spending of integrated services for children's protection and well-being as an investment. Could you share in more detail what this exactly means? Over to you, Doctor.
So I am not going to read my speech because I think to be very frank, I am here since 4 years and a half, and I'm repeating the same thing. So the question today, Because here we are, in an audience where all people are convinced. The question is why we still need really to convince that investing in child protection and well-being is needed more than ever, and it has a high return on investment because all that we know it. So my question is very frankly, and we need to have a kind of self-criticism, regarding why, or with all this advocacy, why we are not. So yes, you told it, it's needed because very frankly, the situation is alarming worldwide. Even the 1 billion is not the truth because you have millions and millions of children worldwide who are forgotten, invisible, and not counted. And based on my country visit, my bilateral, engagement, I just came back from Lesotho, and Zambia, and I can tell you that really, very frankly, children who are the least responsible are paying a huge tribute. We never saw a so huge child rights crisis worldwide, and not due only to economic crisis, financial crisis, war. Yes, sure, but also, as you highlighted, Brian, it's a political commitment because children are not voting, and what we are seeing currently, it's investment in youth because it's about productivity, it's about vote. So we have to really, because you were highlighting the number of votes, related to children, in the first policy brief on, the Summit for the Future, it was only mentioned once in page 12. So it was a battle really to make sure that if you need a people-centered and sustainable development, it's based on a life cycle approach. And you cannot have youth who are productive and youth who are really duly trained and having all the skills if you are not investing since the early childhood and in the community where children are living. This is one main question. The other thing that for me is also important here, it's also, we know that it has a cost because since many years we know the cost of violence against children. It's almost 5% of national GDP. And if you add the indirect costs, and if you add all the costs on impact and of the impact of on mental health, on well-being, is $393 billion per year. So it's huge. And if you add to that the dropout of school of children, it results, a loss of life earning up to 14%. And if you add to that, investing and, violence in and around school, it's results in a loss of 11 trillion USD of life earning. So we have many information regarding that. So the question for me is really why we are not achieving it, and this is important. So we need to convince more regarding if we need to invest, and even the SDGs, the 17 SDGs are interlinked, echoing the interlinkages of all, the rights. You cannot end violence against children if you are not targeting, all the other. And you cannot achieve the other if you are not ensuring child protection and well-being. So the question is why we are not doing it. Because, and here it's important, I am seeing it, in many places. After the pandemic, you saw many countries start spending money on cash transfer. And we have another results here regarding all this increase of investment, and they are happy to show it to you. But when you did the assessment globally, it's only 24% of children who are benefiting from this social cash transfer. And in the low income is less than 15%. So something is going wrong. And we are seeing also, because we speak a lot about ODA and I will come back, but also the budget, the national budget expenditure. We are seeing children as a problem to resolve, not as an asset to invest on. When we are speaking with policymakers, the problem of children, but the problem is the adults and the policymakers. And I agree with you, it's political will, but it's also about accountability. To be very frank, because this is really important. We are speaking about coordination. Okay, we know that child protection and well-being is cross-sectoral. It goes beyond the Ministry of Social Development that is always the weakest ministry and in many countries, because it involves justice, health, education, social protection. It involves local authorities. It involves also empowering people and bringing them on board. So it's really cross-sectoral. And it involves also the Ministry of Planning, Budget and Economy, because he has a big role to play really regarding that. Because if he's not seeing it, as part of the national and local development plan, we will never achieve anything because you have many parallel plans. I can tell you when you are visiting a country, you have at least 10 plans. parallel. You have the wonderful National Development Plan. It was adopted, by the Parliament, and you have some national expenditure dedicated to that. But protection children, child labor, child marriage, child trafficking, violence against children online, and I can give you a lot. And they are relying on donors. And here it's really important to see why, and you highlighted, why we are not moving from this siloed approach. This is a big issue because we need to make sure to bear in mind that you have also all the donor-driven agenda. And we have to target it. And in the same time, the competitivity, between agencies, between NGOs to survive. So the issue is how we can switch from donor-driven and competitive approach to make sure that we are putting children in the center and their caregivers, and to see how each one is going to complement the other. And to stop all this, fight and competition between logos and flags. I can give you an example. I was in Lebanon, and here it's made me crazy. You have a big sector, Zaatari camps. Huge number, thousands of children and families inside, many programs inside. But in the same time, they are inside, victims of violence, victims of exclusion. Child marriage is increasing because it's become a coping mechanism. It's not only a social norm, it's becoming a coping mechanism. Child labor. But these children are living there since 11 years without no perspective. Did you realize that you have one adolescent is dying through suicide each 11 seconds? And it's too late. When the light in the eyes of children switched off, is too late. So I think here it's really how we can move forward regarding that, and using all this wonderful intergovernmental dialogue, high-level political forum, Pact for the Future, financing development forum, and huge, and also at regional and global level, to really switch from this approach, and also to have this people-centered, development that starts since the early childhood. And another point that I want to highlight, it's not only about, the cooperation at ODA. It's not providing more money. It's to also strengthen the capacities of the local services we are delivering. Because in some countries you have budget, but it's not spent. So we need to be very clear how we are really strengthening the systems of the country and not pilot project to sustain. And I am tired by promising practices 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we know what has to be done. And we are saving money. And my last point will be also investing in children is also investing in children as part of the solution, as you highlight. They are wonderful, not only speaking up, but acting. They are experts, and they can tell you what is not going well. And we have also to stop fighting poverty and so on only, through cash transfer. We need to switch from survival mode to really strengthening the empowerment. We need to make these people really responsible and empowered. I think it's the way, if we are not really using this opportunity today to tell, my God, we are facing a crisis. And I think what made me having many concerns, that currently worldwide, what we are selling as, big message that the cost of life is not the same for all children. It depends from where you are. And this we have to be very careful, very frankly. So I think we need to, you were speaking about humanity and heart, and I think here it's really a strong moment to have a strong self-criticism. The system as it is not working. And it has to change. And it can change, but we need to have this courage, because it's investing means also investing in the way we are doing it. So I will stop here just to remind that we need to stop speaking about children as a problem to resolve, because they made me crazy when I am speaking. We need to address the problem of children. So there are so many things.
Thank you. Thank you for your passion and commitment and the work that you do. And it is best that you did not read your speech.
I hate to
spoke from your heart, because we got, we really understood where we have to be based on what you just shared with us. You talked about coordination instead of operating in silos, strengthening local capacity, and looking at children as experts. But you also talked about return investment. What we hear in the corridors, at least coming from an FFD perspective, is constantly return on investment when it comes to private sector investment. We're not talking about return investment from investing in children, right? Or where impact can be most most made. Yesterday we had a session, the NGO committee organized a session on the Global Accelerator for Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transition from the ILO. And the talk about finance, the finance ministry being at the center. It is very important to have them at the table, because otherwise we're talking about children's, focusing on culture ministries, and you're talking about gender ministries, but we're not having the finance ministry at the table where the money is being handled. So how is it that we can bring that voice? And I mean, I'm very curious to know, coming from the IMF World Bank meetings, how many finance ministers are actually coming to the UN for the FFD forum itself. We hear many are not here, but Ambassador Wallace might be able to share with us as to how many are going to be here. So we see that divergence in the way what happens there stays there, but it doesn't get translated to here. So I mean, every one of these voices have to be heard, and what is it that we can do to do that? And so kudos to World Vision for the report, and also the power with it. You talked about this issue.
If I may, just to let you know, when I am planning a country visit, when I am requesting to meet the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, they are really astonished, But I told them, coordination, if it's not in the political agenda, is not going to work.
Exactly.
Because the tool of the other, if it's not in the planning and budget, and if it's not involved, it's not going to work. So I think also the way, as NGOs, as also child rights defender, we need to target those who are taking, the decision, financial and political one.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And so with that, I would like to invite Grace Wood, Head of Sustainable Development for the Permanent Mission of UK. And over to you. I have a question for you too. Last year, the UK published a white paper setting out how the UK can accelerate progress on the SDGs and recommitting to the core principle of leaving no one behind. Can you share more on how children, a particularly vulnerable group, fit into this approach, and your thoughts on the findings of the World Vision EY research within this approach? So over to you, Grace. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also have a pre-prepared speech, but I think I'll go a bit off-piste as well. And it was very helpful, actually, that the dashboard shows the breakdown for the UK. It doesn't look great. So I think I have an immediate action after this to share that dashboard. Please send me the link with my colleagues back in HQ who lead on our financing, allocation work, and our various policy departments around that, because I think that wasn't really a good reflection on the UK as a development partner that sort of has historically prided ourselves in investing in children through education, through healthcare, through nutrition, child marriage. These have all been kind of bedrocks of our development support for the last sort of 20-odd years. As you can probably tell from what I'm saying, I'm an ex-DFID, if people know what that is. Formerly DFID, now trying to be a diplomat. And before being here in the UN, I was in Ghana, Pakistan as an education advisor. So this was sort of my bread and butter. So I was very much on the sort of ODA administration side of things, working with government, the UN agencies, NGOs, research organisations in those places to contribute what the UK could towards strengthening the education systems. And I think through those experiences, I really saw how ODA is only ever a tiny piece. I think in Ghana, ODA was about 2% of the expenditure the government had, or the budget the government had available for the education sector. 2% that's nothing. But I think, as my colleagues were saying, that can be a very influential 2%, because that's sort of, money would literally do this project or do whatever. So it kind of had outsized impact. But kind of sort of working on those projects, I very much saw what ODA can do, ODA for children through education, health, social protection, etc., but that it was a tiny piece of the broader puzzle, and so hence I feel like I'm telling a bit of my life story, but hence I sort of came to my own conclusion that there's the bigger system that needs to be reformed, and people have spoken about multilateral development banks opening up the balance sheets there, making more capital available, private sector investment, and more domestic government expenditure and targeting that more. Obviously that needs fair taxation for multilaterals, that needs debt relief and things like that. But I think, ultimately the decisions are made by national governments about how to target domestic resources. So I think, in the FFD conversations this week, the lead up to some of the future, and then the fourth FFD conference, we need to be talking about all of those different sources and how all of those sources come together and are focused on children. We can't actually just focus on ODA, because that will only ever be a tiny piece of the puzzle, and an increasingly tiny piece of the puzzle. We need to be looking at how private sector are investing, how the MDBs are investing, and how governments are targeting investments to education, to health, social protection, climate impact, etc. And I'm sort of very conscious that for many kids around the world, they faced a massive disruption in life during the COVID-19 pandemic. I was in Ghana at the time. All schools closed for 10 months. That was huge. Many kids didn't come back. Government statistics will probably say differently, but many kids didn't come back because they started working, or they got married, or they had kids, or they moved, or whatever. They tried to manage. And so that disruption initially that is still impacting young people's lives, alongside then, what we're seeing in terms of children being affected by conflict and impacts of climate change. I think it's a huge amount of uncertainty for young people at the moment. And someone mentioned accountability. I think we also do see children taking their power. We see children and young people around the world trying to hold governments to account, standing up, around the climate crisis, around conflicts and wars. I think part of the challenge for governments is to actually listen and to not try to oppress those voices, and to really hear. We see sort of protests being led by children and young people, being stamped on, clamped down, and people being let go from universities and things like that. And so if we're serious about hearing children and young people's voices, we need to actually hear and take into account young people's voices. So anyway, that is my sort of opening spiel, I think. And then I think just to say a bit about the white paper, because that's what I've been asked about. So look, I think in the white paper we've a lot is around finance, as I say, around kind of unlocking finance from different sources. A lot is around how we try to reform some of these bigger financial systems, which will also require the UK to look at our shareholding in multilateral development banks and how we, share more of the power that we have, at where we target our resources as well. So we're trying to do a bit of that soul searching, I would say. I think it will take a little while because it is trying to take a different approach to just thinking about ODA. It is thinking, right, where do we as the UK and sort of other countries that have historically accrued power have that power, and how do we make the system more equal, and are we willing to? So we're trying to do a bit of that work on the various boards and in meetings and things. So sort of expect a lot more from us on that, and that's not just because our ODA is less than 0.7% at the moment. That is because the system does need to change, and I think finally we are recognising that more, which I feel very proud about. On the ODA side, we're still investing quite heavily in education around the world, in water and sanitation. At the UN Water Conference last year, we announced a big new WASH program, a lot of which is directed towards helping to end preventable deaths of mothers and children. We're continuing to support the UN Global Programme to end child marriage, and a lot of the CRSV work that happens here, and also trying to address sort of online safety as part of that domestically and then internationally. And I think what's also good, what I'm seeing more of, is that we are starting to put out more impact stories, I would say. That sort of doesn't represent it well enough, but we're trying to assess more the impact of the decades of investment that we have been putting in through ODA into children, young people, and vulnerable communities worldwide. So I think we recently put out something on our Girls Education Challenge program. It's a kind of 12-year flagship program, and the sort of impacts that that's had on the young women that were supported through that, and then their children now. And we're starting to get more of that data and evidence ourselves on the returns on investments that we've made, and we'll certainly kind of share more of that. But obviously a lot needs to be done. I think in November that Colombia is holding the first ministerial conference on violence against children, and we see that as a really key opportunity to keep building momentum and commitment in this area. And yeah, I think just to leave with a sort of final thought that I'm taking away from today is how do we continue to be sort of honest about where we have invested or not, and where we do listen or don't, and really take that very seriously as a historically major donor. So that's certainly a conversation I'll be having with my colleagues on the basis of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Grace. And I think the dashboard is already making an impact, because you're going to go back and follow up. So that is great. And also for pointing out that ODA is only a tiny piece. Bigger system needs to be reformed. Accountability is important, and children needs to be heard. And governments need to take them seriously. So thank you also for providing an overview about the white paper, and also talking about the ODA commitments and some of the areas that are challenging but needs to be addressed, and in the lead up to the FFP conference, what you have in mind, as well as the conference in Colombia. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. With that, I would like to welcome our final speaker, Goni Densagles. I'm sorry for pronouncing your name incorrectly. If I've done that, apologies. Global Chief, Public Finance and Local Governance, UNICEF. Wonderful to have you, and thank you for the incredible work that UNICEF does, including this area. So
thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anita, and I want to thank Adelis for giving UNICEF the space to join this critical discussion. I also had my little points prepared, and the figures on the investment return that we've been calculated memorized, and I do want to just share with you a few of these ones, just for us to think through. I love the 1 to 10 in ODA investment return, and I'm gonna use it definitely when I'm gonna start moving and asking for more support. There is the immunization return, which is talking about 1 to 20. There is the ECD return that is talking 1 to 13. There is the pre-education that is talking about the 1 to 17 for vulnerable children. And when I was looking into all these figures, I was thinking, but as Dr. Najat was saying, I'm tired of having so much evidence and not making any change.
Not acting.
We keep repeating the same. The evidence is there. But then I look into how much a high-income country invests in children, right? Let's look into the budget, and I found $200,000 for high-income countries versus a low-income country that is looking into $12,000. I mean, this is inequality, and obviously this needs to resonate to the international community when we need to think of the deprivations that come with it, right? But at the same time, we see that this is not happening, beyond the 1 billion, which is 1 billion children living in multidimensional poverty. But then let me add that other number, 333 million children living in extreme poverty. And we're saying it's less than $2.25 per day. This is radical. As I said, we have the evidence, and we are asking for a very small part of the budget when we know the budget is great. There has never been more wealth in this world than today. So why is this happening? And to me, I have to confess, I'm a human rights activist that decided to join the UN. I was working with the International Red Cross and Lawyers Without Borders, and I decided to join the UN so I could become closer to the development outcomes and the way we could serve member states, right? And I joined initially UNDP, and I've been working with UNDP for 18 years. I started working in the ODA discourse, and I realized this is not about ODA. Right? Ghana had a strategy that was talking Ghana beyond ODA. The African Union has, as part of the 2063 agenda, the commitment to work without ODA. So then I look into the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda was already telling us two important things. ODA can be used as a catalyzer of development. So planting the seed, right? And the Addis Ababa Action Agenda was also telling us, we cannot achieve this only with ODA. We need to bring together public and private and domestic and international. And this is what UNICEF is trying to put forward now. We realize that we need to strengthen the domestic systems. We need to talk with ministries of finance. There is no way we're going to achieve any change if we keep talking only with ministries of education, with ministries of health. We're not going to achieve that change. We need to strengthen the systems. And yes, this is not easy to mobilize, and it's not easy to mobilize money from ODA when you come into, and I can tell you my budget and my unit is the poorest in UNICEF. So it is really hard to mobilize ODA funding from that system strengthening approach. And I looked at the dashboard and I saw the politics and finance part in your dashboard, and I thought, I wonder if that has been calculated looking into how we can make the finance systems deliver for children's rights. To me, that is the message. The putting children first is about making the finance systems deliver for children's rights. Salome, Colombia, in this beautiful video was referring to influencing the budget. We need to bring children into influencing the budgetary cycle. But there is much more. UNICEF has been working to track expenditures for 15 years already, doing a number of budget briefs. But there is a lot of much more to do. There is no fiscal space. We're getting the message. There is no fiscal space. Debt payments are crowding out all the liquidity we have. Well, we need to make sure that we focus on the revenue side. Tax reforms, they are happening. There is the whole green taxation that is happening, the health-related taxes, that can be directly linked with child protection. So we need to start bringing those finance and fiscal frameworks and align them with children's rights. And this is the vision we have now in UNICEF. We're working on the revenue side, we're working on the expenditure side, influencing the budget, but also bringing social sector ministries with the Ministry of Finance, commissions in the parliaments to influence the budget, right? And we are also bringing the debt discourse. Let's not switch off when we talk about debt, because debt is coming. And this is going to crowd out all the financing we're talking here. this is huge and this is a problem. So let's look into how we can promote better debt transparency. How can we look into more fair lending agreements, right? And criteria and honest criteria in terms of borrowing, where children can be first in those negotiations. And last two comments is the other vision of climate and climate finance. And it is very interesting that today we had Canada, we had Jamaica as the co-chairs of this financing movement, but also we have the UK, who has been a leading actor in all the climate and climate finance. There is a need to ensure that the green and the planet has a future, but the future is children. So how can we make sure that the national determined contributions, which is the national frameworks that talk about climate, how can we make sure that they look into education, health, social protection, adaptive social protection systems, wash, nutrition, right? So the green agenda and the green transformation needs to be just and needs to look into children. The other is the humanitarian financing. 40% of all the affected people in humanitarian are children, and nothing is invested to them. So how can we, the international community, strengthen the domestic systems ahead of the crisis? How can we deploy agile instruments? Because that's not happening, and we know it's not happening. So we can target the population and we can achieve and reach the children and every children. So just with that, I want to thank again and to transmit again the message, putting children first, fully endorse, and to me, I will add making finance systems deliver for children's rights.
Thank you Maria, for making the call for finance systems deliver for children, for bringing children to the discussion, importance of taxation and debt transparency and fair lending agreement, which is a major point of contention and discussion as as private creditors, the credit rating agencies, they all come into play when it comes to lending to countries and the debt servicing that's happening, and that translating essentially to austerity measures where social protection is being impacted, and so all this needs to be put in perspective, and for bringing all that into the discussion. So I think we were supposed to have some time for questioning. I'm not sure whether question and answer. I don't know whether we have a few minutes or should we just move into.
We want to close.
We want to close. Okay. So with that, I would like to move to Michael Messenger to close the session out and to wrap up. Okay. Over to you.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your excellent moderation, and thank you to all of you who've participated and shared some really challenging comments today. I'm really grateful for the participation. Dr. Majid, I'm still thinking about that. Why not? Why haven't we been able to make this? We hope that this is just one more tool in the overall continued advocacy for children. That's our commitment as a child-focused organization. We have recommendations, of course. I won't take the time to go through them now, but the ideas that we should be ensuring child-targeted investment and mainstreaming child well-being across our ODA mechanisms, putting a child lens on our diplomatic efforts, being accountable to children and listening to their voices, taking them seriously, and of course also promoting locally systemic change in how we're doing our work. Above all, I guess I just want to say thank you for sharing our commitment. One of the foundational documents for World Vision has a phrase in it that I always find very encouraging and challenging as well. And that is that we hope that as a child-focused organization, as we think about the impact that we can make in child well-being, that the measure of our wealth and the treasure of our hearts should be the safety, well-being, and potential of children. So thank you for joining us with that call today, and we're grateful for your participation. And we hope that you will help us share this report, the dashboard, and the message more broadly. Thank you very much.
Seeing you soon.